Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you at. It's been a very long time, and there's a lot of reasons, but the major reason is um, my old king passed 6 months ago today, and everyone got their own way of dealing with mourning, and me, I deal with it more in spirit and in private than anything. But I guess through my rest, or you can call it the ancestors, the spirit, whatever you want to call it. I got a sense of urgency today to do as he was. See, my pops, he would have pushed when he couldn't push no more, and then he would have pushed some more. You know what I'm saying? He did it. He did it for years. So I'm not gonna focus on too much of that though. But in honor of his continuum on the way he moved, you know what I'm saying, and his whole steez, I gotta keep pushing. So with that said, a lot of people have this readers or leaders thing going on. So I wanted to do something different. I was trying to figure out something, and I don't have anything concrete. Right now I'm going with the reading cipher. And for those of you that do know, a cipher is 360 degrees of perfection. And I chose to name it the reading cipher because at the end of the day, I don't want to be the guy like just talking to you. I want you to hear what I'm saying and see how it applies in your life possibly. And maybe you can even teach me, because we can all learn in various ways and mannerisms, right? So I'd like to thank you for joining me. What else? I don't have anything like prepped or anything like that. So I guess I'll start off, and this is going to be my new thing, to let you know that fortune favors you, and may your day be great and your tomorrow be greater. That's going to be my little saying, you know what I mean? And I'll develop as I go. So I'm going to start this whole thing over in honor of the way my pops think and those that came before us that was trying to lead us in the right direction. I'm going to read the book of solutions that I call solutions, because to me, I've read hundreds of books, but this book in particular hits home for me because it's very relative to the people most dear to me. Even though I care about I care about my people, and I'm gonna just leave it at that. You know what I mean? And if you're my people, you know, and if you don't know, you don't know. That's cool. So let me go ahead and get started with this, right? So again, this is the reading cipher, and what that's all about. This is an initiative to influence and encourage productivity, creativity, and critical thinking by reading daily, because the number one tool at our disposal as Black people, or even poor people, and when I say poor, I mean just passing over opportunities repeatedly. I do not mean monetarily poor. I mean just making bad habits. Remember, I did the compound effect, and if you haven't seen that, you might want to go through some of my videos. You know what I mean? This isn't like a show or anything. I do this more or less for the people that I love, specifically my son, my daughter, and if I have any more children, or any of the children that I love, specifically my nieces and my nephews, so that if anything ever happens to me, or if anything ever, and not just them, you know what I mean? I want to be remembered giving back. Not just that's all I am, but in this manner, I'll always be heard. And I wish I could have did this with my pops. I used to always say, man, I need to record you. I need to, you know what I'm saying? Write a book. You know what I mean? I could have helped them. It's just a lot of stuff. So take advantage of the opportunities that you have now and appreciate those that are in your life, because the money and all of that stuff means very little when it's time to go. When it's time to go, you're going to wish that you built more memories with the people that you cared about the most. So with that said, we're going to hop into the reading. You know what I mean? Because my pops would want me to keep going. And if you are dealing with the loss of someone that you love dear, very important to you, hey, keep pushing. You know what I'm saying? One thing that it will want you to do, because I don't want y'all to stop if anything ever happened to me or when I pass. Man, I want y'all to push even further and harder, because I'm not here to help you do it, and because I would want to see it too. If I could, I'd be just like my pops, man. I'd make sure everybody eat. And I know that's a wide thing to say and a big burden to handle, but that's what it do, man. So let's get on into this. We're gonna talk. I'm gonna do the narration for Powernomics. by the Honorable Dr. Claude Anderson. And if you don't know him, do some research on him. The man is brilliant. So this first part is going to be talking about how winners and losers are predetermined. I'm only going to read a few chapters. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to read a few chapters. I'm only going to read a few pages. Like I said, this is unrehearsed, and I was inspired by my pops. You know what I mean? And not just him, but primarily him. So let's get on into this so, man, y'all can get on about y'all day. I just wanted to give y'all a piece of this goodness. You know what I mean? Part 1. How winners and losers are predetermined. Racism, monopolies, and inappropriate behavior. Alice, which road do I take? Cheshire Cat. Where do you want to go? Alice, I don't know. Cheshire Cat. Then it doesn't matter which road you take. And that was by Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland. The challenges we face. As the Cheshire Cat said to Alice, who was lost in the wonderful fantasy, it doesn't matter much which road you take if you don't know where you're going. It is time for Black Americans to take a good hard look at where they have come from and where they are going. Are they moving forward or standing still? After centuries of participating in protest marches, race riots, and demonstrations, and pushing for integration and passage of an endless number of civil rights laws, Black Americans are increasingly sensing that something is wrong. They question whether or not they are on the right road. Comparative analysis of our socioeconomic condition shows that Black Americans have entered the new millennium much the same way they entered the previous 4 centuries, as an impoverished, powerless, and neglected people. Since there have yet to be any programs and public policies specifically offered to eliminate the plight of the Black masses, their future, like their past, looks bleak. Amidst a rising tide of white conservatism, the wealth and income gaps between majority white society and Blacks are widening. Nearly a half a century after the Supreme Court ordered racial desegregation, Black Americans still bear 6 to 8 times their proportional share of poverty, broken homes, homelessness, criminal incarceration, unemployment, and other social pathologies. Desegregation should have been about redistribution of wealth, power, and resources, not social integration. Social integration has only addressed the symptoms of our dilemma rather than the causes. It is extremely difficult for Black people to progress when the same hands that held the whip will still hold almost all the wealth and power. During centuries of Black enslavement and Jim Crow semi-slavery, the majority society secured and retained its inherited advantages, while a Black minority inherited a legacy of disadvantage in this race-based society. Whites acquired ownership and control of nearly everything of value, as well as a system for keeping Blacks non-competitive and powerless. The sheer existence and size of a growing Black underclass is prima facie evidence of institutionalized racism that manipulates symbols, resources, and power to advantage whites over Blacks. The reality of Black America's dilemma is that they are predestined to become a permanent underclass if they do not break free of the numerous disadvantages they have inherited. Blacks should get off the social road to nowhere. There are no yellow brick roads to the future, nor will Blacks simply stumble into wealth and power in a competitive society. To find a better road requires Blacks to unlearn old behavior models, strategies, and learned helplessness in race matters. Blacks must, let me read that again to clarify. To find a better road requires Blacks to To find a better road requires Blacks to unlearn old behavior models, strategies, and learned helplessness in race matters. Blacks must understand the nature and competitive race. Blacks must understand the nature of the competitive race and make a radical metamorphosis. They must decide where they want to go, get out front of their competitors, and work hard to get there first. If Blacks compete, they can expect to succeed and survive in the race for wealth and power. Race, racism, and wealth. Although slavery and Jim Crow, semi-slavery, ended generations ago, their legacies live on in various forms of structural racism. Contrary to popular notions about the concept of race, it is more than a biological grouping. Race is about financial, political, and social currencies. It is a form of stored wealth and power. Whiteness has monetary value. Knowing the origin and nature of the value of race is essential to any analysis of Black America's dilemma. It is important that Blacks know why the race problem refuses to die and how it is used to keep them a non-competitive and powerless group. The word race first appeared with the emergence of the slave practice in the 16th century. That was the 1500s. That was similar to the letter J. And to a very well-known book that a lot of people cherish that was created and used to manipulate. It wasn't created at that time. It was created much earlier, but it was used to manipulate during that specific time. Anyway, as we were saying, it is important that Blacks know why the race problem. Okay, I said that. Records indicate the word race was selected because the various European slave trading nations were in a contest, competing to profit from the mineral and human wealth of Africa. The prize for winning the race was the power to develop Western civilization. You know what? I'm going to go back just a little bit so that you can get all of this in essence. I only got a couple more pages. Bear with me. This is my first day. I know it's Friday, but it's raining, and you're going to pay attention to the white media. You might as well go ahead and listen to some Black folk talk about something great, something good, and something that you can use to empower you and yours for future generations. Whiteness is monetary value. Knowing the origin and nature of the value of race is essential to any analysis of Black America's dilemma. It's important that Blacks know why the race problem refuses to die and how it is used to keep them a non-competitive and powerless group. The word race first appeared with the emergence of the slave practice in the 16th century. Records indicate the word race was selected because the various European slave trading nations were in a contest, competing to profit from the mineral and human wealth of Africa. The prize for winning the race was the power to develop Western civilization using the wealth extracted out of Africa. Black people were non-competitors in the race. They were the prizes, so they could neither play nor win. All the competing slave trade nations, religions, and ethnic groups benefited and were advantaged by Black slavery. Slavery is most often approached in social and moral terms. It is seldom discussed in terms of the primary incentive that undergirded the slave trade wealth building. Slavery must always be explained in monetary terms. Throughout the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, organized religion used doctrines to justify slave trading. During this same period, botanists and others in the biological sciences were studying and attempting to stratify plants and animals based upon their biological similarities and differences. They ordered plants and animals by species. Though it took nearly 300 years, the concept of race eventually merged with the concept of biological species. By that time, white Europeans had secured nearly total control of the world's wealth and resource powers. Their new concept of race established superiority on the basis of who controlled the wealth, power, and resources at that particular time in history. Wealth, power, and privileges became the prerogatives of non-Blacks. Through intellectual sleight of hand, race became synonymous with the term species in the mid-1800s. At that time, Charles Darwin developed the concept of biological race in his Origin of the Species, and it quickly became popular. Often called the survival of the fittest, Darwin's theories, as well as a number of other quasi-scientific concepts, were used by educators, politicians, and religious leaders to justify Black slavery and establish a qualitative ranking of inherited genes and human fitness. Naturally, those controlling the wealth and power put their cultural values and biological characteristics at the top of the racial order and Blacks at the bottom beneath Caucasians and Mongols. All the major European religious denominations at the time used the Bible to teach racial ranking with implicit Black inferiority. During the Black Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 60s, the concept of biological races was intentionally expanded to include cultural, religious, ethnic, and all Spanish-speaking language groups which were competing with Black people for rights, space, and privileges. The concept of race was then diluted to a attitudinal level, and the term racism was used interchangeably with such terms as bias, prejudice, bigotry, and discrimination. Now, the term racism has become so amorphous that it has little meaning and is applied to all so-called minorities. If Black Americans are to resolve and reverse the legacies of slavery, they must view and treat racism based upon its original meaning and intent. Racism, race without a finish line. Racism is wealth and power-based competitive relationship between Blacks and non-Blacks. Racism is a wealth and power-based competitive relationship between Blacks and non-Blacks. The sole purpose of racism is to support and ensure that the white majority and its ethnic subgroups continue to dominate and use blacks as a means to produce wealth and power. Centuries of black enslavement and Jim Crow semi-slavery resulted in the majority society becoming 99-foot giants and blacks 1-foot midgets. This massive inequality in wealth and resources made blacks non-competitive and totally dependent upon whites for the necessities of life. True racism exists only when one group holds a disproportionate share of wealth and power over another group, then uses those resources to marginalize, exploit, exclude, and subordinate the weaker group. In America, it is whites who use the wealth and power to marginalize, exploit, and subordinate blacks. Whites can deny blacks employment, educational opportunities, business resources, a place to live, or the right to vote. Therefore, according to this definition, black people cannot be racist. No group of blacks has the power or exclusive control of resources to the degree that they can educationally, politically, economically, and socially exploit or marginalize the white race. Blacks can only react to racism and try to alter the conditions that racism creates. Despite the realities, there are numerous conservative blacks who act as apologists for white racism and confuse the issue. Conservative black radio talk show host in Los Angeles, for example, charges that blacks are as racist as whites. His desire for white approval, as well as his ignorance of history, impedes him from understanding that white racism and black prejudice are not the same thing. Blacks have a reason for their feelings about whites based on how they have been treated by whites. The white race, on the other hand, has never been marginalized by the black race. Racism reinforces the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow semi-slavery. Blacks have been unable to escape from those legacies because the majority society acknowledges the operation of racism in the distant past, but minimizes its present significance. The burdens of inequality, and I'm going to finish up here. The concept of race has progressed from the international competition for wealth and power to religious doctrine to biological classification to a personal attitude. Yet, conditions and opportunities are unequal between competing minority groups. There has been no equal sharing of burdens in our equal opportunity society. Members of ethnic, class, gender, disabled, religious, Spanish language, and sexual orientation groups have not been treated in a manner equal to blacks. This nation has never enacted and supported public policies and laws that have denied non-blacks access to this nation's educational, political, social, and economic systems. These groups have not been customarily lynched, castrated, exploited, and denied the fruits of their labor. Blacks are the only group of people forced to practice capitalism without capital in the richest and most capitalistic nation on earth. These facts, coupled with the majority society's total unwillingness to approve corrective action and reparations for descendants of black slaves, reveal the true nature of racism against black people. Racism and other legacies of slavery predetermine the success of inherited inequalities. Racism and other legacies of slavery predetermine the success of black Americans as a group. One of the most glaring examples of inherited inequalities is wealth distribution. Black America's percentage of ownership of the nation's wealth remains where it was in the 1860s on the eve of the Civil War. At that time, when nearly every black person in America was either in full slavery or semi-slavery, blacks owned 1/2 of 1% of this nation's wealth. The emancipation of enslaved blacks in no sense rendered social justice and economic recompense. Today, more than 140 years later, we are 100% free, yet black Americans still only own 1/2 of 1% of this nation's wealth. Today, the income of blacks, as compared to whites, has regressed to the level it was at in the end of the 1960s. Approximately 38% of the black population is beneath the poverty line, and another 33% is marginal, just above the poverty line. So that's about 67% really struggling to get by, right? The limited assets that black Americans most often have, such as automobiles and personal effects, depreciate rather than appreciate in value. Blacks even find that our homes, usually our most valuable assets, have a limited market and prices are dictated by urban renewal, expressways, or gentrification. The average black person passes on the zero assets to future generations. The typical white family is more economically stable and secure. Approximately 87% of the nation's economic assets are now frozen within the dominant white society and are passed on from one generation to the next in such forms as stocks, bonds, land, businesses, trust accounts, endowments, businesses, foundations, and insurance policies. Therefore, white children are privileged to enter the world with 87% of the resources they need to succeed in life already in their families, race, communities, businesses, schools, governments, or social organizations. Thus, succeeding generations of whites can access these wealth resources over and over again. What is wealth? Wealth refers to the net value of a person, group, or community less their liabilities or debt at a given point in time. It is stored value. Income, in contrast, refers to a flow of dollars over a period of time. With rare exceptions, most blacks are so marginalized that they own and control little wealth or resources anywhere, including in their own neighborhoods. The ancestors of enslaved blacks were forced to concentrate simply on surviving, pursuing civil rights and integration. They had little to bequeath to their descendants. Even though they succeeded in their social and civil rights efforts, their children cannot inherit welfare, food stamps, public housing, or a good job. I'm going to stop right there. And I just want you to think about that. Again, fortune favors you. You just got to know it, dig deep within yourself, and do it for those that can't do it no more, or ain't going to do it as good, or just ain't got the drive to do it and have given up. Because that's all we need is just a little push. Keep pushing. I hope your today is great, and may your tomorrow be greater. Peace.